Okay, I'm going to start because there's quite a lot of material and we might not even make it through all of the material for today. Last time we started on semantics and we said what semantics is. It's the area of linguistics that looks at meanings of single words on the one hand and of multiple words, compositions of words. We said that there is a way to represent semantics or a larger meaning of a sentence using logic. Specifically, we looked at an example from propositional logic, first order logic, these famous syllogisms. But I also showed that semantics is more than just the linguistic or propositional meaning of the sentence. There is more to this. There's interpretation of referring expressions, for instance. So linguistic items that refer back in the discourse. For instance, here is an example of a pronoun. There's also content that cannot be easily represented using logics, in particular first order logic, such as emotional content or such as this emotional adjective here or evaluative adjective here, poor, or another evaluative adverb here, fortunately. So there's more to meaning than just the logical part of the meaning. Context plays a crucial role in interpretation, and meaning has to be interpreted in context. We also looked at examples of linguistic meaning versus speaker meaning, aspects of meaning that are carried by utterances uttered in relation to a specific hearer or recipient of the information. There's aspects to meaning such as committing to a proposition, or aspects to meaning that have to be derived based on information that is not at all explicitly stated, such as this example here about speakers' cognitive states or beliefs. We briefly touched on meaning that can be partially derived from composition, from compositional interpretation, and also we started looking a little bit at what is meanings of words in particular. We will move on to this today, to lexical semantics, and we also looked at some specific examples of meaning that interacts with the situation in which the given utterance is uttered. Here are some examples. There may be temporal references to the specific time in which the given utterance is uttered, such as now or tomorrow, to the location where the utterance is uttered. Here you have some locative expressions, referring expressions such as here, there, or that. That's a deictic expression that points at a specific location, or references to the speaker or the hearer, explicit references to the speaker of the hearer, such as I and you. Today we are moving on specifically to lexical semantics and distributional semantics. Lexical semantics, as the name suggests, is the part of semantics that looks at specific meaning of words. This will be meaning related to isolated words, but this will be also meaning related to multi-word expressions, expressions that consist of more than one word and form a whole. This whole may be interpretable compositionally, or it may be not at all interpretable compositionally. Examples of such multi-word expressions you're probably familiar with are idioms. We had this image in the first slide of raining cats and dogs. This is such an example. Lexical semantics deals with meanings. What we'll be referring to in lexical semantics as word senses. So the meaning of a word will be referred to as a sense of a word, and the sense will be the one that is interpreted in the given context. There is more than the meaning that is contained in the sense. If you hear noises, can you hear noises in the background? I hope you don't hear these noises in the background. Yeah, so if you hear more of these noises, this is just a dog that's being a very unhappy camper because he has to sit through a lecture on lexical semantics. So don't worry about that. There is there is there is meaning that's contained in the sense, but there's also something related to how the word is used and the interpretation, conventional interpretations in use. And this is what's called connotation. So what associations a given word evokes in specific contexts. This may be also contextually bound. So just to sum up, word senses are distinctions or between meanings in the context of use of the same form. And meanings may be shared between different forms. You will see that. This is the concept of synonymy. So multiple words different on the surface may denote the same thing, may mean the same thing. We also have this notion of semantic roles, and this is more related to the structure of the word as such, and the structure of the word and the syntactic structure of the word, or the syntactic context of the given word that a given word can appear in syntactic context in which the given word can appear in, and the semantic roles will indicate in what relations the arguments of a word, of a predicate typically have in relation to that predicate. Like I said, the connotation is something that is beyond linguistic meaning of a word or core sense of the word, that is also beyond truth conditional semantics, and it's something that's associated, an association that the word evokes. So these are the key concepts in lexical semantics. Now, specifically related to word sense, there is a number of concepts that you need to know about and distinguish. In general, the word sense is the meaning of the word. So it's some description of what the given word refers to. Words, of course, can have multiple senses, and this is due to phenomena in lexical semantics referred to as polysemy and homonymy. They are related only in the sense that they denote words with different meanings, but they are somewhat different. Polysemy denotes multiple meanings that are related to each other. For instance, the word university may mean either the institution as such, the institution of a university, but the word university may be also used to refer to the building of the university. So on the one hand, we have an organization, an entity type of type organization. In the other case, we have an entity type of an object. Building is an object. So this is polysemy. This is true polysemy. There is a word which has different meanings, but these meanings are related to one another. The institutionalized education at the university level is somehow related to the building university because it happens probably in the building. Well, not now. No, it's not happening in the building itself. But yeah, in the usual case, it's really the case that the education at the university level takes place at the building of the university, whereas homonymy is a somewhat different phenomenon in that a word can have different meanings. So the same surface form can have different meanings, but these meanings have no obvious relation to one another. And a typical example of such a phenomenon is the word bank. Bank may be interpreted as denoting financial institution. It may be denoting the institution as such. It may be also denoting the building of a bank. This would be polysemy. This is what you already know. But the bank in English may also denote part on the riverside, riverbank. And the riverbank bears no relation to the financial institution. So this is homonymy. The different meanings of the word have no relation. It's just coincidental that the same surface form is used for distinctly unrelated meaning. Now, the task of identifying which sense of a word is meant in a given context is known in natural language processing as task of word sense disambiguation. So it's the task of identifying word meanings. In practice, this would mean that you go through a text word by word and decide that this word, here, word, has this specific sense from some sense inventory. And this sense inventory may be found in lexical semantic dictionaries or in dictionaries in general. So go word by word, look at the words and say, okay, in this context, this word has this sense from this meaning inventory. One specific resource that is rather well known for and broadly used in lexical semantics are the so-called, these are resources, they exist from different languages, are so-called word nets. WordNet is the name of an English resource of this type. WordNet, I would suggest that you click on that link here and go to the website of WordNet. I'm not sure if I can do that now. I guess I'd have to switch to a different tab. I won't do this because it will just introduce the complication. But please click on this link and look at what this resource looks like. It lists words in terms of synsets. So a synset will be a group of words that are related by a relation of synonymy. So they have the same meaning. And WordNet also describes relationships between synsets. So in what relation the meanings stand with respect to one another. I'll give examples of different lexical relations in a moment. So go to this resource and look at what this kind of representation looks like. You'll need that. And when in the case of a task of word sense disambiguation, you might interpret this task as assigning, for instance, from a resource such as WordNet. So a word, it would have meaning labeled, for instance, meaning with some index in WordNet. This would be the task of word sense disambiguation in practice. So how do we know which sense of a word is meant? Well, that's not a trivial problem. In general, the word sense disambiguation task is a rather complex problem, and there's not an obvious single solution. Meanings are contextually bound, and especially in case of non-literal meanings, we'll get to that later. It's often hard to determine automatically what meaning of the word, which meaning of the word is meant. But also simple solutions are possible and very often pursued, and they rely on an observation or hypothesis, rather observation that meanings of words that look alike are likely to be related. And this look-alike can be in practice realized by looking at the surface form of the word. If you remember from the lecture on morphology on words, words are formed creatively in the process of derivation. You can derive words from one another. And this derivation leads to words that will be probably most likely semantically related. Modulo homonym, of course, because you might have different words, same words referring to entirely different things. And this can be explored by methods such as string matching or substring matching or matching entities below the word level, such as trigrams and word n-grams, character n-grams. You have an example of trigram here. And calculating also distance between surface forms of words. One such, so how far in terms of string distance one word is from the other. And one algorithm that is rather well known in this for this purpose is the edit distance termed after Levenshtein, known as Levenshtein distance. I will not go into the detail of this algorithm, but I would like to ask you to check this algorithm out in the reference here. Edit distance, Levenshtein distance, basically calculates a number of edit operations of certain types, insertions, substitutes, and deletions at the level of characters to get from one word to the other. So here is an example: to get from the word begin to an end, to the word end, we would have to perform 4 such operations. Of course, there's more than one solution to this problem. To get from the word street to straight, you'd need 3 such operations. And based on this rough estimate of how distinct, of how far from one word is from the other, you can tell whether it's likely to have, or you can suppose how likely it is to have the same meaning as the other. So that's distance-based methods. Just to give you an example of what a word sense might look like, here's an example of a word ride, which has overall 16 senses in WordNet. And like I said, please go to WordNet to look at what the structure of such an entry is in WordNet. Just to give you an idea, here is a selection for the word ride. This word will appear in two sets of meanings. One will refer to the verb ride and the other to the noun ride. The word ride can take on these 2 parts of speech. And here are just examples of senses that it can denote. It may mean riding along, riding over through something. It may mean traveling on the back of an animal, such as horse riding. It can mean to be carried or travel in a vehicle, give someone a ride in a car, and so on. So these meanings will be listed as a kind of meaning inventory specific to a given part of speech of a word. But like I said, please check out the structure of an entry in WordNet. You'll need it anyway for the exercise. An interesting phenomenon related to lexical semantics and to word senses in general is that meanings evolve over time. What we meant by a word some time ago may change, and it may change rather rapidly. Here are two examples. One notorious example is the word gay, which originally denoted something tasteful, anything from related to tangible and intangible sensations, but something playful, sweet, cheerful, something pleasant, bright, or witty, frolicky, and now has been specialized into something very specific in the 90s. So this is an evolution of this word from the beginning of the century through the 50s, where it was actually very frequently used, and now has been specialized to practically only refer to the sense, meaning in terms referring to the sense, meaning an individual who is homosexual. So this is a process known as meaning specialization. We will not go into details of different phenomena in semantics and phenomena related to meaning change over time. Is just one such phenomenon, so the process of how meanings changes, but this is a process of called specialization. Here are two other examples of similar phenomena from even earlier uses to modern uses. The word broadcast had nothing to do with the modern interpretation of the modern meaning of the word broadcast, which now has a kind of metaphorical meaning, and the original meaning was rather literal. This is also a frequent phenomenon that meanings evolve from concrete to abstract. But like I said, we will not go into detail. And here's another example with the word awful, which actually changed its meaning to an opposite meaning. This is also an interesting phenomenon. I will not go into detail of terminology here, but awful used to mean something that is that had a clearly negative connotation, moderately negative connotation, or something through something that had clearly negative connotation, and in modern language it's used as an emphatic means of expressing positive connotation. So it's reverse in meaning. Okay. Like I said, there are different types of lexical relationships, and they can be grouped into two broad categories. One is related to ambiguity of meaning, and ambiguity is what we already talked about earlier, the fact that a word may be multiple meanings. This phenomenon, like I said, is termed polysemy. There are two types of polysemy. One is related to that says more structural related, and the interpretation of the word by its syntactic and semantic context. So it's related to the construction as such. So you have an example of a noun, a fast typist here. Fast means quick. Typist means someone who types, does the typing. And the default meaning of this noun phrase, a fast typing, would be typically a typist, a person who can type fast. However, if you use this word in a specific context, and let's say this context is that of a ski race, for instance, between typists and lawyers, then suddenly this fast typist becomes not a typist who can type fast, but a typist who can ski fast. So constructional polysemy is polysemy that refers to sense differences that are determined by a context of use. So which construction it's the given vaccine is used in. Now, different type of polysemy relates to the fact that meanings can change, and meanings can be related or unrelated to one another. And meanings can, a given word can adopt new meanings. So this scope of meaning of a given word can be extended. And this is what sense extension polysemy is all about. It's systematic polysemy due to productivity in word use. Here's one example. The word chicken may mean both the animal and the meat of the animal. Another example is that of interpreting a mass noun as a count noun in alternating ways. The word beer in the sentence, I drank too much beer last night, denotes the sense in a mass interpretation, whereas would you like a beer? A beer, this is even emphasized here by this determiner a. This is a countable noun, countable instance, occurrence of this word, and then it means a bottle of beer. So from a mass noun to a count noun with the same word by the phenomenon of sense extension. Like I said, there are many more why is the slide not? Oh, yeah. There are many more types of, even different types of polysemy, but we will not go into details of everything. This is just to give you an idea of semantic processes, specific lexical semantic processes. Now, homonymy, I already mentioned that. This is the example of a word, of a phenomenon where a word with the same form can have unrelated senses. So have the same lexical entity and the senses unrelated. Here is the bank, our famous river bank versus money bank. Another example is a coach. A coach may be the bus or the sports instructor. The two senses are distinct, have nothing to do with one another. So this was ambiguity. You saw that this was about the fact that a single word may have multiple meanings of different types. And the other type of lexical relationships are those of congruence. These describe relationships between related or unrelated words in systematic ways. And we already mentioned one of those relationships. It's a relationship of synonymy. Synonymy denotes phenomenon, lexical semantic phenomenon by which one or more lexeme, one or more words can have the same meaning. This is a pervasive phenomenon in language. One example is adult and grown up. Another example, water and H2O. I use these examples specifically, especially this symbolic code here, because these multiple senses may not refer to the same type of code. Here is our linguistic verbal code, the word water, and this belongs to a somewhat different code, a symbolic code that's used in a specific sub-language, the language of chemistry. But still there is a relationship of synonymy between these two signs. This is a verbal sign and this is a symbolic sign denoting the element, the water as the element. So this is synonymy. Of course, there is never a perfect synonymy. There is no such thing as meaning words meaning exactly the same thing. So there is a somewhat different ring to the word adult than to the word grown up. Grown up rather emphasizes the fact that some person is going through stages in the development, whereas adult emphasizes the final state. So there's never practically perfect synonymy. There's always a somewhat different ring or connotation. This is exactly what connotation is between synonymous words. Of course, in this case, it's more clear because this symbolic code denotes exactly this, what is denoted by this word. So with the specialized languages, especially with formal languages, formal synonymy is actually possible. Well, that's why I also use this example. Antonymy is the opposite. The senses are opposite. Here is an obvious example, short and long. So synonymy and antonymy are two sides of same or opposite meaning distinction. Now, these hyponymy and hypernymy are also related to lexical relationships. Hyponymy denotes a sense that is a subclass of another sense. So these are vertical or hierarchical relationships. Dog is a hyponym of animal. There is an ISA relationship in terms of ontological relations between the concept dog and the concept animal. Hypernymy is the opposite. The sense of an item is a superclass of another sense. So an animal is a hypernym of a cat. And all of these relations you will also find in WordNet, of course. So please check out WordNet for sure. You'll need those. You'll need to know what WordNet looks like. Another type of lexical relationship that is pervasive in language and very often used, because it's also used in reference in a kind of a process of simplification or optimization of lexical choice, is the relationship of meronymy and holonymy. Meronymy refers to relationship of being part of something. So when X is part of Y, then we say that the word X is the meronym of the word Y. And the other way around, Y is the holonym of X, sorry. An example here is finger is a meronym of hand. So this is the part-whole relationship. Synonymy, antonymy, same or opposite meaning. hyponymy, hypernymy is a relation, so this is hierarchical relations, and meronymy, holonymy, part of relation, one way or the other. Okay, is this clear so far? This is a lot of terminology. I think you should know some of this terminology, but I would hope the meaning of those words is clear based on the description. If you have any questions, please ask. Okay, now, of course, words are used not only in their meaning and in the literal sense as they occur in the meaning report inventories in the dictionaries. Meanings are words are often used in ways that exploit the fact that language is creative. And this is what metaphorical meaning is about. It's then a meaning that is beyond the literal sense of a word. And this is typically achieved by expressing one concept in terms of another one. And these two has some relation with respect to one another. So that this transfer between the literal meaning of a word and the non-literal meaning, so metaphorical meaning, can be identified via this relation. This concept is based in a rather broad field of study on metaphors, and in general, about metaphor, you need to know that there is how metaphors appear, how metaphors are formed. And this is exactly expressed in this first sentence. More specifically, there is some systematic correspondence between concepts. And we will refer to one of those concepts as the source domain, and the other concept, the target domain. The source domain will be the literal one, and the target domain will be the one that we want to cast the literal meaning to. The source domains are typically tangible, physical objects or experiences and are more concrete than target domains. This is why we use metaphor. We want to express something that typically is not easy to express in concrete ways. It's something intangible. And the target domain is the more abstract than the source domain. It's very often related to experiences, emotions, ideas, or thoughts. And interpret the target domain in terms of the source domain. An example here of this kind of conceptual metaphor that is very often used in language that you may have not even realized how often is the metaphor of argument being a war. We see it very often in language and expressions such as he attacked a weak point in my argument. So you see here, attack is a word from a semantic field associated with war, but it's used this mapping between war and argument and some kind of relation. If you picture an argument, you can picture it as a type of a battle between two persons in it's a verbal battle between two persons. So the lexical field of this target domain may be used maybe interchanged between the two domains. Here's another example. I've never won an argument with him. Again, win is a word associated with battles, winning a battle, and here it's used in the context of an argument. Or your claims are indefensible. Again, defense is something that's from a domain of battles and wars, defense. And here it's mapped onto this other domain of arguments. So these metaphors, the so-called conceptual metaphors, highlight some concept, some concept, some aspect of the target concept, and to some extent ignore other aspect of the target concept. So the target concept here is the argument. And this in the example of argument, this is the cooperative aspect of argument that's hidden, that disappears in this metaphor argument of war. Argumentation, by contrast to war, is rather a cooperative act. So we argue for a reason to come to some common conclusion, whereas war is rather an uncooperative event. These kinds of metaphors are very often culture specific and conventionalized. And so by that also language specific. But some are also cross-linguistic. Okay, is this clear? Is the concept of metaphor and this mapping between source and target domain clear? Okay. So it's a fun exercise to, I mean, for a linguist. If you're not a linguist, maybe it's not a fun exercise for you. But it's a fun exercise for a linguist to spot these kinds of metaphors, conceptual metaphors in language. And there are more than you expect. If you're interested in this, I strongly recommend a book by Lakoff, Metaphors We Live By. Okay. So like I said, we so far touched on the meanings of words. So what words, what concepts, what senses meanings evoke. There is a different aspect to lexical semantics, and that's that of more closely related to syntax and how, in what structures a given word appears. Specifically what argument structure a given word appears. And that's the concept of semantic roles. Structured predicates take on arguments. A typical example of a predicate is a verb here, illustrated by the word hid. And semantic roles refer to the underlying relationships between a participant of an event, so in practice, an argument of a predicate, for instance. So the relationship that this participant has with the event expressed by the predicate, typically the verb. Not only the verb, because there are also other word classes that have this kind of structure and can be characterized by semantic roles. We have an example of the verb hit here, and its predicate argument structure consists of two arguments. There is the person that's hitting and that thing or a person that is being hit. And the semantic roles are exactly those which denote the meanings of those arguments. The agent is the one that performs the action, and the one that upon whom the action is being performed is often referred to as patient or object. And it's invariant under syntactic alternation. So here you have a passivization of that same sentence. Bill was hit by John. Bill is still a patient. This is the person, like I said, person object upon which the action was performed, and John is still the agent. Now, the set of semantic roles differs between linguistic theories and approaches to semantics. There is no set or predefined set of roles that is used, but some of those roles are shared between the different approaches, and even the labels are shared. So here are examples of semantic roles. according to one specific semantic approach, where these labels are as listed here. You may, in different theories, find different labels. I already mentioned that an agent is a semantic role of a person or thing who is the doer of the event, or who is performing an action. The patient is the one that undergoes the action or changes the state. Very often this is a surface object of the verb. This is the case here. The object, direct object of the verb hit is here the patient of that predicate hit. Yet another role, beneficiary, denotes a referent which is advantaged or disadvantaged by an event. Here's an example. He fought for his country. So his country benefits from that fight. So the word country here, that noun country, is in the relation of a beneficiary. Experiencer, as you can imagine, is an entity or referent which receives, accepts, or experiences some action or undergoes an effect of an action. Here's an example. Bill was scared. Being scared is an experience, and Bill is the experiencer of that event of being scared. Now, goal is a place to which something moves, or things, or thing toward which an action is directed. So here is an aspect. It highlights the directionality of an action, literal or non-literal. Here is an example with which denotes the literal meaning of the of an action. He threw a book at her. A book is a patient here. He is the agent here. We already know agent and patient. He performs the action. A book is what the action is performed upon. And at her, so whoever is the referent of that pronoun her is the goal of the action. Now the task, there is a computational task related to identifying these roles in a sentence, and that's the task of semantic role labeling. So it's identifying or naming the relationships between predicates and the arguments. This is a non-trivial task. Like I said, the identification of the role is structure is related to the structure, but also to a context of in which the word appears, especially with words. If you think about the possibility that hit may have multiple meanings, you might probably first have to identify which meaning of that word is, and only then assign semantic roles, because under different interpretations, under different senses, the semantic roles might be different. Okay. Are there questions so far? Let's move on. I have to also drink a little bit because my throat is getting sore again. Okay, so let's move on to other aspects of meaning, and that's the phenomenon of being phenomenon of compositionality or non-compositionality. And that refers to how meanings of a whole is built from meanings of individual parts. Let's start with multi-word expressions. So-called multi-word expressions are constructions which function as fixed entities, or can be productively produced, that consist of more than one word. It's literally what it means. It's a multi-word expression. It's an expression that consists of more than one word. Here is one which functions as a fixed phrase, vice versa. But these two are non-fixed expressions. So driving instructor can be productively altered to denote an instructor of a different type, for instance, skiing instructor, diving instructor, swimming instructor, and so on. Whereas argumentation quality assessment is something that means the process of assessing the quality of an argument. And compositional semantics is exactly that, identifying the meaning of a complex expression based on meanings of the individual expressions that the complex expression is composed of. As you can already see, it's not always possible to create to recognize a meaning of a whole based on the meaning of its parts. We already had examples of such expressions earlier. Raining cats and dogs. Here are two other examples. Kick the bucket is yet another example of an idiom. Whereas here, long time no see is an example of a fixed phrase, a conventionalized phrase that again, whose meaning again cannot be reconstructed by analyzing the meaning of the individual words, because this expression rather denotes something beyond these words. Long time no see typically will denote something, will be associated with something like maybe being happy to see someone. So it's not only expressing the fact that a long time has passed between the last time we saw each other, it's actually adding some emotional content to this. And this emotional content cannot be discerned just by looking at the individual words. I see that I will have to rush a little bit. I will ask you to just look at the n-gram-based interpretation. So these approaches to the multi-word expressions at home. This is a very simple approach to identifying the meaning of a whole. Based on a trivial, let's say, composition of looking at arbitrary n-grams that a large expression consists of. But mainly compositional semantics, rather than just calculating a meaning of a whole based on individual axioms, is rather the more interesting phenomena that it's addressing are in identifying the relations between words of different types and identifying scopes for scope-bearing elements, and identifying collocations or using phenomena such as recurrence of specific combinations of words more frequently than others. So compositional semantics, like I said, it's the process of identifying the meaning of a whole based on the meaning of its parts. And it has to account for those phenomena, except for contextual phenomena. In principle, meanings, like we said already in the beginning of this section, semantics, we represent meanings in terms of some logics, some formal systems. And in those formal systems, depending on what formal system is used, it may account for different types of these phenomena. For instance, relationships between entities, between arguments in a predicate argument structure, as well as temporal relations, which describe courses of events, can be represented by means of model logics. Whereas relationships between entities from the world will be represented by model logic, which can also describe ontological relationships. So by different types of formal systems. Now, scope-bearing linguistic phenomena. This is an interesting set of phenomena which are related to the fact that some words in language affect interpretation, and this in a way that can be expressed by by um, by a range over which the given word takes qualifies a different a core entity. An example of such entity is a quantifier, which indicates the quantity of some objects. This may be generalized quantifiers, but it may be explicit quantifiers such as every or a determiner in English is also a quantifier, which means that there is at least some. So there exists some amount of an entity. Negation has also takes a scope, so in the sense that it ranges over certain, it may range over some entities that are mentioned in a sentence. So it will also affect in formal representation in interesting ways. It has the function of inverting the polarity of an item. And adverb phrases are also such examples which have specialized meanings of that of focusing or expressing certainty or necessity. One example of such focusing adverb phrases is the word only or even, certainty, and necessity. For instance, adverbs such as necessarily or certainty. Certainly. Sorry. So what is scope? Scope is the domain of applicability of a linguistic operator. Just as it has a very rather direct correspondence to what you know from programming languages and formal logic, actually. If you look at this example here, quantifiers, scope of quantifiers depends to some extent on syntax, but some of the scope is actually only a formal artifact. Here is an example of a sentence: every student reads some book. That would be the same. Every student reads a book. And here's one interpretation of that sentence expressed in first order logic. And under that interpretation, this quantifier every, expressed by the logical quantifier for all, and some, the quantifier here is expressed by logical quantifier exists. It will be the same for determiner A. And this universal quantifier has a wider scope than the existential quantifier. So under this interpretation, what this expresses is that for each student, there is a specific book that they read. So for all students, there is a book such that the student reads that book. In principle, because in this sentence, there is no indication as to which quantifier takes scope over which. So there is theoretically this other meaning possible. Of course, that's probably not the one that's intended, in which the existential quantifier takes a wider scope than the universal quantifier. So here you have, there is a book, and for all students, that student reads the book, but that's a unique book, the same book. This is the less likely interpretation. I already mentioned another rather famous sentence in formal semantics that you will see as an example of this scope ambiguity, and that's the sentence: every man loves a woman. The interpretation is essentially the same, and the second scope interpretation is just an artifact of the fact that scope-bearing elements may take scope in different ways. Now, how to know that this meaning is more likely from this one is another story, of course, especially for computational semantics. Now, for focusing items, the scope may be decided by syntax and or stress. So if you look at these sentences, I worked only tonight versus I only worked tonight. Here, we emphasize the fact that it's only tonight that I worked and not the night before. And here, only worked, where only takes the scope over just this verb, we emphasize that the only event that took place tonight was the event of working and not, for instance, dancing or reading. Similarly here, probably every student reads a book. The scope of the focusing item probably is over a quantifier here, whereas here it's over a predicate. Every student probably reads the book. So accordingly, you'd have to express the scope of that scope-bearing operator in a formal way, similar to here, as taking scope over only a predicate here in this case, and over the quantifier in this case. Similar story with negation. Negation is also a scope-bearing operator. Negation is, in general, a problem case in a lot of NLP applications, and in general in NLP, it's often neglected or ignored. But of course, it affects meanings of sentences in substantial ways. Namely, it reverses the meaning. And you have here an example of two sentences. Many arrows didn't hit the target, and not many arrows hit the target, where in one case negated is the predicate, and in the other case negated is the generalized quantifier. Many is also a quantifier, so-called generalized quantifier. And there are two interpretations to this first sentence, namely, that for many arrows, so if you read this, just read and think about the meaning of the sentence. What could it be? Many arrows didn't hit the target. It can be interpreted as for many arrows, let's call them A, it was not the case that this A, the arrow, hit the target. So here we have this many, the quantifier has a wider scope than the negation not. But it also is possible to interpret this in an alternative way as the negation having the wider scope than the quantifier. And this would mean that it was not the case that for many arrows, this arrow A hit the target. Do you see this distinction, and do you understand in general the distinction between scope, in one case wide scope, and in the other case narrow scope? And are you familiar? I mean, I hope you're familiar with this. I mean, you must be familiar with this kind of predicate logic, first order logic notation and language. Is this clear? Is this last part clear? And in general, the scope, whether this is this clear? Yeah, okay, that's good. Yeah. Okay. Like I said, which meaning is meant depends on many things. What we emphasize here when we construct these two interpretations of the sentence, we follow the two options based on syntax. But depending on how a sentence is stressed, one or the other meanings may be actually meant. So it's possible to stress this sentence in such way that actually this meaning is meant. You can stress it, for instance, as probably every student reads a book, with a stress on reads. And then it's more likely that this probably doesn't take scope over every, but rather it takes scope over the focused element. This is why we call those items focusing items. That they will associate with what is focused. There is this also notion of association with focus, but this you don't have to know. And similar here, this negation, depending on how you stress, will be interpreted differently. So not many arrows hit the target versus not many arrows hit the target. Not many arrows hit the target, and not many arrows hit the target. And the scope of not would be associated with what is focused in the sentence. Of course, in written language, in written text, you will not see this focus association, because unless this focus is explicitly marked, but in text you don't see it. But in spoken language, the interpretation is facilitated by sentential stress. Okay. Now, we already talked about multi-word expressions and the fact that they are constructions which consist of more than one word, which may or may not be interpretable in terms of the individual lexemes that they consist of. There's also a specific type of multi-word expression known as collocation, and these are simply multi-word expressions that tend to occur with greater frequency together than their individual frequencies would predict. So you very often see these two words together doing homework rather than making homework, for instance. So this would be a collocation. In my opinion, is a type of a fixed phrase which is one of the most typical phrases which include opinion, this is also this type of fixed phrase is also known as collocation. Some collocations also may be foreign items, simply because they are borrowings as a fixed phrase from a different language. And here is an example from Latin. It's the same case with idioms. Often these combinations of words, especially this phrase, kick the bucket, is an example where the two words kick and bucket, if they occur in near vicinity, they will most likely occur in this construction, in this idiomatic construction of kicking the bucket. And other ways, no, it's not likely that kick and bucket will appear together unless situational context says something. For instance, that Peter actually kicked some bucket. Okay, collocations are very often less ambiguous than the words taken in isolation. So here is an example of a collocation, heavy smoker. Its meaning is clear, even though the word heavy has many meanings, and most of those meanings are literal. Of course, this meaning here is non-literal, but it's clear, rather clear and unambiguous what it would mean that a smoker is a heavy smoker. Yeah, like I said, multi-word expressions are particular type of collocations, fixed expressions. Okay, we are done with the lexical semantics. We'll make a short trip into discourse, very short, unfortunately, because discourse is a large area in itself. Discourse is either taken to be part of semantics or it's considered an area of linguistics of its own. I rather prefer this second approach, discourse as an area which addresses larger units than a single sentence. Discourse is about interpreting sentences in the context of other sentences. Very often, as it says here, we refer to a larger piece of text as discourse, and often we refer to discourse interpretation as interpreting both the structure and the content of a larger discourse, of a larger text. The term discourse may refer to extended text or dialogue, spoken and written, and a specific type of discourse is, of course, dialogue, and that's a cooperative, two or more sided conversation. The structure of discourse, narrative discourse, of course, differs from that of dialogue, in that dialogue has a specific structure of participants taking turns in contributing to that discourse, to that dialogic discourse. There's also a different meaning of the word discourse as a kind of societal discourse, a specific way in which we talk about things in a given culture. For instance, the way we frame things. In discourse semantics, we mainly mean this, and this is rather an area in sociolinguistics. So we will not go into details, but just so you know that there is an interpretation of this word discourse. Again, discourse is a polysemous word that refers to something not formal as we mean it in semantics or in discourse semantics. What are those larger units that discourse is about? In general, they are larger units beyond a sentence. So the first larger unit beyond a sentence might be a paragraph, and a collection of paragraphs would be a text. And these larger segments are genre-specific. You'd see different larger units in, for instance, poetry. You'd see different larger units in scholarly discourse, so, or in books. In books, you'd see things like sections, chapters, and in poetry, you'd see stanzas and verses. What is a paragraph? Paragraphs are typically identified by layout. These are obvious things. Sequence of one or more sentences whose boundaries are denoted by line breaks. I could say this could be a good definition of a paragraph. Ideally, each paragraph in well-structured discourse, in good composition, should represent one thought, one argument. And in practice, it's often not the case. There are phenomena in discourse that are also subject to natural language processing, and that are very interesting phenomena and complex phenomena. In general, this area of discourse processing is at the further, or especially deep processing of discourse, identifying discourse meaning, is at that far end of any NLP pipeline, which many NLP systems never get to. But there are interesting phenomena there that are rather obvious in interpretation to humans, to recipients of discourse, and rather hard for a machine. Two such phenomena are the phenomena of coreference and coherence. Coreference is about different expressions in discourse referring to one thing, and coherence are devices that are used in discourse that make sure that this discourse stays together. It's continuous. It's flowing in a continuous way, in a logical way. Let's look at a little bit more detail in coreference. Coreference is, like I said, a phenomenon of more than one expression referring to that same thing in a piece of text. Common examples of coreference include those listed here: anaphora, cataphora, and noun phrases. An anaphor, a typical example of an anaphor, that is an expression referring back in discourse, is a pronoun, exemplified here by this pronoun here. Max walked in, he sat down. He here refers to that Max who previously walked in. Cataphora is a related phenomenon, but the referring is to the following discourse rather than to preceding discourse. This is a less frequently a phenomenon that occurs less frequently. It's clear after he walked in, Max sat down. He here refers to that Max, that when we read here, we don't know yet who walked in. So we have to store it somehow in mind that there will be someone walking in to interpret the discourse and fill in later that that person who walked in was that Max who appeared only here. Split antecedents are exemplified here by a plural pronoun. Max and Linda. Max asked Linda to join. They arrived together. They, this plural pronoun here, refers to these two entities, which are split in the sense that They are individual entities, but they are understood collectively in this interpretation of this pronoun. So this is an example of a collective meaning of this anaphor. And a rather pervasive type of referring expression is a noun phrase, and different noun phrases may be used to refer to the same entity, and those noun phrases are said to be in a relationship of co-reference. Here's an example. Apple is based in Cupertino. The company is actually called Apple Inc. Apple denotes the company Apple. The company, this definite noun phrase here, refers to the company Apple, and it's actually called Apple Inc. The proper noun here, Apple Inc., refers to that same entity that is the antecedent of this definite noun phrase, and that refers to that company that mentioned here. So the terminology you already saw, the entity that is used to refer to something is called an anaphor. The entity that's being referred to is called an antecedent. Of course, coreference resolution is one of rather popular computational tasks, an entirely non-trivial computational task. As you see already here, these references can be complex. They can span multiple sentences. In the case of this coreferring, identifying coreference, so-called coreference chains, the task would be to associate or link this entity Apple Inc. with the company and the Apple. And this is one of computational tasks known as coreference resolution. In general, this is one of the harder tasks, largely unsolved. It's language specific, of course. And yeah, it's an active area of research in NLP. Now, coherence. Sorry, I have to. Okay. Sorry about that. Now, coherence is about continuity of meaning of in discourse. Like I said, it's about the fact that a discourse rather should make logical sense. So if we put sentences together, it's not for random reasons. Typically, we want to convey some message, so there should be logical relation between sentences so that this discourse can be interpreted in meaningful ways. But the interpretation depends on context again. Here's an example. Max hit Bill's car keys. He drank too much. Now, when we interpret this he, we take into account what would make sense most. So what would be the most logical meaning of this discourse? Probably because we have the information here that someone drank too much, and that we are talking about car keys, so about driving. It's probably not good to drink and drive. So the most likely antecedent of this pronoun he here is that Bill, because it's Bill's car keys. So probably Bill is the one who would want to, who might want to try to drive. So this discourse would be coherent. But this discourse would not be rather coherent. Max hit Bill's car keys. He liked spinach. There is no relation between what we are talking about here and what we are talking in the second sentence and what we are talking about in the first sentence. And so it's likely, it's not clear which should be the referent of that pronoun he. So as you can see, the coherent structure of discourse facilitates or not interpretation, for instance, of pronouns. talk about global coherence and local coherence. What you saw here is local coherence between adjacent sentences. Global coherence is about coherence of an entire discourse in a given text. Now we can ask, does local coherence lead to global coherence? And you have illustration here that will put this into question. These two discourses are locally coherent. Max hit Bell's car keys. He drank too much. We already saw that. He drank too much. No water was left. These would be also coherent. And now if we string these two together, it's not clear whether global coherence is preserved. In this little discourse, Max hit Bell's car keys. He drank too much. No water was left. The relation between the meaning of the intended meaning of this last sentence is not clear in relation to this interpretation that we of this word drinking too much that we get to after we've processed the first sentence. So it's not clear that local coherence. It's not always the case that local coherence leads to global coherence, as you can see. There is a related phenomenon to anaphora, and that's the phenomenon of cohesion. Cohesion in discourse, unlike coherence, which is about the logical structure, cohesion is about continuity of the structure as such, in particular a grammatical structure, not meaning. So cohesion is about linguistic devices which make sure that the text actually hangs together at the surface level. So cohesion is about using devices such as pronouns, anaphora, or these co-referring expressions of different types referring to the same entity. So we talk about the discourse in general, and the discourse, as we already saw, most likely should have some meaning that it's that is interpretable, and often meaning of larger discourses are signaled explicitly by means of specific linguistic units. Especially some relations between discourse elements can be signaled by specific connectives that denote specific rhetorical relations. These are called discourse markers. Here are examples of discourse connectives that signal logical relations, such as causality, result, logical coordination, contrast, and these two indicate contrast. But there are also discourse markers or discourse connectives in discourse. The examples here you see here are mainly used in spoken language, which are just conventionalized and serve to ensure a discourse flow, especially in spoken language. Here you have examples of such particles and conventional phrases. Well, I mean, just, sort of, like you know, or even the whole phrase. Well, I mean, just sort of like you know, used as a filler. These are discourse markers. So these are devices that signal relationships between segments of discourse, or as in the case here, make sure that the discourse flows together, and there is a relation between the adjacent segments. The connectives here explicitly signal specific rhetorical relations between segments of discourse, but very often these relations may be left implicit. Here are two examples. I took my umbrella. It was raining outside. It's not clear. I mean, we can interpret the relation between these two sentences because we know the relation between carrying an umbrella and the phenomenon of raining. So in this case, we can infer the causal relation without a problem. On the other hand, when signaled explicitly, the task is even easier. I took one umbrella because it was raining outside. So the computational task here would be to identify relations between discourse segments. In case of explicit connectives, it's rather easy, but in case of implicit discourse relations, it's not so trivial to do. It's not a trivial task to do computational, to identify the relation between these two units. Even more so with larger logical connections between discourse, where the task would be to make inferences between units of discourse. Here is an example of an implicit logical inference that would be rather hard to perform computationally. Sunny is a cat, so Sunny is mortal, where this part of the syllogism was left implicit. We know that all individuals of this world are mortal, so this is a true statement. In case of an explicit part of that syllogism, of course, the interpretation is easier. And what we are doing here is basically interpreting discourse. We are talking about here about interpreting discourse. This is a computational task known as discourse interpretation. So identifying the meaning of a discourse. There's also a task of discourse parsing, so identifying the structure of a discourse. And discourse parsing is sometimes used interchangeably to mean also identifying the not only the structure but also the meaning of discourse. One of the harder tasks in computational tasks related to discourse is identifying the relations between the individual units. So identifying, for instance, relations such as the causal relation here, or this additional inference that needs to be made in order to conclude that this discourse is true. Okay. So far, we've talked about mainly symbolic and just theoretical phenomena in lexical semantics and discourse semantics. Sorry, I have to drink something once. And we talked about, in lexical semantics, specifically about meanings of words that can be represented in meaning inventories. And so a sense of a word can be, a sense can be assigned to a word based on a meaning inventory, such as a dictionary or this WordNet. Now, there is a different approach to describing a meaning of a word, and that's that of distributional representation, which refers to the fact that sense of or interpretation of a word can be often discerned by the context or co-text in which a given word appears. The sense can be identified by the words in which in the context of which a given word appears. This is the contextual interpretation. This is rather an idea that was observed a long time ago by linguists. It's this rather famous statement by Firth: "You shall know a word by a company it keeps," which exactly expresses this idea that the meaning of a word, the sense of a word, can be often identified by the context in which a word appears. And this can be exploited in that word senses can be identified using statistical means by looking at co-occurrences of words and making inferences about senses based on the distributional properties of words. So distributional properties, by distributional properties we mean by statistical analysis of co-occurrences of words. The main idea is that the meaning of a word can be observed from observation on a corpus based on language data. And it can be encoded, this meaning, in numerical vectors which represent some aspects of distributional distributional properties of these words. And then the question is whether the composition of word meanings, so compositional meanings, can be modeled by some functions that work on these numerical representations. Let's look into sorry. I think I skipped a slide here. Yeah, a slide got listed here. Sorry about that. Okay, so we'll just, I'll give you an example in a second. There was one example here that by mistake got deleted. The essential hypothesis is that there are certain patterns of word usage that can be used to infer or figure out what people mean when they talk. These are word frequencies and collocations of words. So we already talked about collocations. Collocations are co-occurrences of words in context. And there is also a hypothesis that says basically that the frequency is important. In general, the order of words can be neglected. And this is what's exploited in all so-called bag of words approaches based on this hypothesis that this order is less important than the frequency of a word. The key idea, though, is that that words that occur in similar contexts will tend to have similar meanings. So it's kind of modeling synonymy or meaning a close or far distance in meaning by distributional properties of words. Here is an example of a text that talks about the coronavirus. We have these two words, COVID and virus, which occur frequently in this word. And in this distributional approach, we basically count co-occurrences within a certain window of words occurring together. And this is just an excerpt of a discourse, but in a larger set of documents, we would say here, show here that look at how frequently the word COVID occurs with the word virus, with the word sick, fever, cough, and, for instance, software. And we'd look at those frequencies, we tabulate those frequencies for all the words in the corpus. This approach is known as vector space or vector representation of words. You can think of those frequency tabulations or frequency columns as vectors, which represent frequency co-occurrence of a given word with other words. So in a sense, it's modeling a context of a word in this kind of word context matrix or term-to-term matrix. I already see that we are, I'm not sure, I think I don't have many more slides, but we are done with the time. I have literally like one more slide. I will just finish. And we'll move on to distributional, more details next time. This term-to-term matrix or word context matrix will model the frequency of occurrence of a given word with other words, ignoring the order of those occurrence, of course. The question is how far context to take. This can be interpreted in different ways. We can look at only the adjacent neighbors, left and right neighbor. We can look at the window of n tokens. We can look at the context of a sentence or a paragraph or even a whole document. Once we have such a term occurrence matrix, we can say, we can ask how similar is one word to another, and we can postulate that the closer the vectors representing the words are, the closer the semantic similarity of those words. Now, because we have those vector representations here, we can use vector calculus to calculate using those vectors. So, for instance, we can use a cosine distance between vectors to calculate similarity between words. And here is an example which calculates a cosine between the COVID and virus and COVID based on some collection of documents which we have represented here in this matrix. And we see that the cosine is rather high. COVID and death is also rather high. The cosine between remote and death is rather low. So there would be a weaker association between these two words and a stronger association between two words. And we postulate that, well, maybe those words don't have the same meaning, but they are strongly related to one another. It would be too much to say that they are synonymous. Okay, maybe I'll just move on next time because this is too high level, and I will not finish the whole process of what we do with this matrix. Are there questions so far? Do you get the idea in general of distributional semantics and how to represent words as vectors, as frequency vectors of occurrence, co-occurrence with other words based on a corpus? Basically, we would conclude for today because this is I'm already over time. Sorry about this. Of course, frequency is just one measure that you can put into this. Yes, it's best to try it. It's best to try it. I believe it's part of the exercise. Create this matrix yourself, and you will calculate using vector calculus different measures related to the vectors. And because these are vectors, you can also try to perform operations on vectors. So you can try to play with adding vectors and seeing what comes up. Okay. For the examples, yeah. Death and goal missing in the table? Yes, they are not in the table. I mean, these are just made up examples. Yeah, the table is here, and yeah, these are just made up examples from just to illustrate the idea. Player is also missing, and football is also missing. But the general observation from this distributional model is that even this frequency-based modeling of word context leads to rather good predictions of what you'd expect of meaning, of compositional meaning, based on vector operations on vectors of this type. So you will see in the exercise sheet, there will be an example of computing composite meaning of a phrase based on vectors and using vector operations. That will be that's rather interesting. But people have shown, for instance, that you can, by using distributional approach, you can show, for instance, such relations as if I remember correctly, king plus woman equals queen. That by adding vectors king plus woman, you arrive at a vector queen, something like that. Okay, so thank you for today. We will meet next week still. The plan for the remaining weeks is as follows. The exam is on the 29th. I have 2 reports from people who would like to ask for an online exam. That's fine. We'll accommodate that. We meet as usual next week. We will also meet the week after that for a question answer session. So if you have any questions for any part of the material, you can ask questions on the 22nd. That's the last week before the exam. The 29th is the exam, and we'll set up a date for the alternative exam mode for the people who cannot attend by email. We will get in touch with you. So there's still a chance if someone still would like to report that they cannot make it for the present exam, please let us know as soon as possible, because I would like to estimate how much time we have to accommodate for. Oh, okay. So everything goes well, maybe. Okay. Okay, good. If it works, then it works. Then great. If not, we will find a way to accommodate everybody for the exam in an alternative mode. Okay, so I think we can wrap up for today. The slides are online, and if you have any questions, please send email, and we'll have anyway the question session on the 22nd for the whole material. Okay, that's it for today then. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, and see you next week.